I've been living in my apartment for 3 years now. It's a nice spot, conveniently close to parks, shops, and restaurants. However, since it was built in the late 90s, some aspects feel a bit outdated. Recently, the city's population has grown rapidly, drawing people here because of the good weather, strong economy, and all the festivals and outdoor events. As a result, I've noticed that the landlord's team has been working hard to make repairs and updates to keep up, fixing things like plumbing, repainting, and upgrading appliances to appeal to new residents. My neighbor had lived in his apartment for around 6 years before moving out to a new home. When he left, the landlord immediately began renovating his unit. Since my bedroom wall is next to the staircase in his old apartment, I could hear people going up and down the stairs. They started with his place as one of the first major renovations, and for weeks, I saw workers there, painting and fixing the floors. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I noticed them installing new kitchen cabinets and countertops, but by the time I returned, they had left for the day. Nothing unusual happened in my apartment, until late that night. Around 1 a.m., as I relaxed and watched TV in my room, I suddenly heard soft footsteps on the other side of the wall, moving slowly up the stairs. It sounded like someone was trying to be quiet, and they stopped halfway up, right beside where my head rested on the other side of the wall. I felt a chill and wondered who could be there at that hour. It seemed like someone was just standing there, listening. I turned off the TV, sat very still, and strained to listen, but after a few minutes of silence, the steps continued up to the second floor. I remembered seeing workers in the unit days earlier, but there was no way someone had moved in so quickly. I got up and went to a spot where I could see outside. Though I couldn't see into the apartment, I had a clear view of anyone coming or going. I sat there for about 15 minutes, staring, but saw nothing. Returning to bed, I lay in silence, alert for any noise. My heart was racing as I scrolled through my phone, trying to calm myself. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps again, this time starting in the middle of the staircase, right on the other side of the wall where I had been sitting earlier. Realizing they had been right there listening all along, I felt a surge of fear. I decided to call the police, explained the situation, and was told an officer would be there shortly. After a few minutes, I saw a police car pull up, and an officer began checking the building and shining a flashlight into the windows. I heard him knock on the door and speak with someone, though I couldn't make out what was said. He then knocked on my door and explained that someone had recently moved into the apartment. I laughed, feeling both embarrassed and relieved. I brushed it off as late-night paranoia. The next morning, as I left my apartment, I spotted the maintenance crew carrying out the old refrigerator. Curious, I walked over to the apartment, which had its door wide open, and peeked inside. The kitchen was still under construction, with tools scattered around and paint cans stacked against the wall. I approached one of the workers and asked if anyone had moved in, to which he replied that it wouldn't be ready for viewings for at least 3 weeks. I quickly returned to my apartment and called the landlord to ask if someone was staying there. She seemed surprised by my question. I explained what had happened, and she was alarmed, saying they'd changed the locks immediately. She also advised me to contact the police's non-emergency line. I did, and they asked me to come in to provide more details. At the station, they identified the officer who had checked my apartment and who described the person he'd spoken to, a man I didn't recognize. They conducted a search, but eventually, nothing more came of it. About a month later, an older couple moved into the apartment. When I saw their moving van, I went outside to introduce myself, mostly to see if either of them matched the officer's description. Although life returned to normal, I found it hard to sleep for weeks after that night. Every small noise made me jump, and I even moved my bed into the smaller second bedroom to avoid the wall where I'd heard the footsteps. I never learned who that person was or why they were on the staircase that night, but it remains one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. Before I even finished high school, I was set on living at Paradise Apartments. The place seemed perfect, pet-friendly and affordable, even though I was drawn to features I didn't truly need. When it came time to find my own place, I managed to sublet the only available unit and moved in. But I quickly realized the apartment wasn't as great as I'd imagined. Though the building had been remodeled, it was old, with common issues like leaky pipes and thin walls. I also found out it was in a less safe part of town. Most of my classes were online, but twice a week, I had an 8 a.m. class on campus. I tend to stay home, so I rarely went out except for class, occasional shopping, or visiting my boyfriend. My apartment was nice, but odd things kept happening. It felt like a Bermuda Triangle. Living alone, I found things mysteriously disappearing, only to turn up later in strange places. At first, I blamed my 2 kittens, but a particular oddity occurred on class days. I'd often come home to find my clothing box, which I used in place of a dresser, sitting in the middle of the bedroom floor. Each box held specific items, like socks, undergarments, or pajamas. I thought maybe I was forgetting to put the undergarment box back in place, just distracted in my rush to get to class. But after a while, I started feeling paranoid, even thinking some of my clothes were missing. One evening, I was working on a homework assignment when my boyfriend called, explaining he was locked out of his apartment and needed me to bring my spare key. I left quickly, mentally noting that every light in my apartment was on, living room, kitchen, and bedroom, something I'd definitely notice on my return since I always turned lights off to save money. Since my boyfriend lived only 5 minutes away, I was back within 15 minutes. But as I approached, I could see through the blinds that all the lights were now off. I immediately called my boyfriend, and he came over to meet me. When we entered, every light switch had been turned off, including my lizard's basking light, which was on a timer. My laptop, which I'd left open on my homework, was now closed and powered down. I called the emergency maintenance line and reported that someone had clearly been in my apartment, and since there was no forced entry, they must have used a key. The manager initially dismissed my concerns, but I insisted that I wouldn't have turned off the lights or my laptop, so someone must have been inside. I asked if the locks had been changed since the previous tenant, and he assured me they're changed after each move-out. He suggested it might have been a friend playing a prank, but I'd only given keys to my boyfriend and my mom, who lived 3 hours away, and neither of them would pull a prank like this. The manager finally agreed to change the locks. Given that staff are the only ones with master keys, I mentioned my suspicion that someone on staff might have entered. The manager explained that keys are kept in a secure safe with personal codes to track usage. There were only 2 maintenance workers, an older gentleman who seemed harmless and a younger man with a scruffy beard who made me uncomfortable. When I first moved in, the manager promised a new kitchen counter within days, but it never arrived. A few months later, the scruffy maintenance guy entered unannounced, saying he was there to install the countertop, taking 2 days to complete the small task. Not long after, while I was in the shower, I heard a knock at the door. I called out, "Just a minute," but before I could get dressed, the door started to open. I had to quickly shut it to stop him from coming in, and he claimed he didn't hear me. Another time, he left a note saying he'd been inside, mentioning he'd kept an eye on my cats, though he didn't say why he was there. I reported this to the office, requesting 24 hours notice before anyone entered and that I be present. Afterward, things in my apartment continued to move around, reinforcing my suspicion that someone was sneaking in when I wasn't home. Soon after, I decided to buy a condo with some help from my parents, sublet the apartment, and moved out. Just before my move, my mom came to help pack, and while I was in class, she caught the scruffy maintenance man trying to unlock my door. She confronted him, and he claimed he was there to paint the front door, though he didn't have any supplies with him. A few years later, while I was working as a leasing agent at another complex, the owner of Paradise Apartments came by, posing as a prospective tenant, a tactic some apartment managers use to gather information. During the tour, he casually mentioned Paradise Apartments and asked my opinion. I explained that I might be biased, as I'd left a negative review due to a break-in I suspected was linked to the maintenance staff. He revealed he was the owner and was disturbed by my story, asking for details about the maintenance man. I described the scruffy man, and he called the Paradise manager on speakerphone. The manager confirmed that they'd fired a maintenance worker for repeatedly breaking into single women's apartments. The owner seemed relieved, asking if I'd change my review, but I declined, explaining it didn't change the experience I'd endured. In my years as a leasing agent, I've learned that many complexes cut corners by not changing locks if the tenant was reliable or skipping background checks for employees. Keys were often handled casually with maintenance staff and vendors. When I began managing properties myself, I made strict rules for changing locks, tracking keys, and posting proper notices. If you ever suspect someone's entering your apartment without permission, document everything and tell the property staff, police, and family or friends. You never know who might have access to your keys. Because of past issues with security and wanting peace of mind, I chose an apartment with a gated garage and key fob access to enter the building. However, the garage gate frequently breaks, management will repair it, but within a week, it's often malfunctioning again, left unlocked for extended periods. This essentially makes the gate pointless, as anyone can enter. I've reported this multiple times, but the issue never seems to stay resolved, and building management has been slow to address it consistently. The stairwell doors from the parking garage don't lock either. There's a second door that should require key fob access to get into the building hallway, right near my apartment. Unfortunately, that lock is also broken and will open if you simply pull on it. I reported it a month ago, but it's still not fixed. Last week, around 9:15 p.m., someone started banging on my door. It was a man wearing a white hoodie with red writing, a baseball cap under the hood, which obscured his face. Since it was late and I wasn't expecting anyone, I felt uneasy. I looked through the peephole and didn't recognize him, so I stayed quiet, hoping he'd leave, but he knocked again. Then he just stood in the hallway, texting on his phone for about 8 minutes. I was really shaken and called my boyfriend, who thought it was likely someone who'd mixed up apartments, maybe even a bit tipsy. Then, last Saturday, after taking my dogs out, I came home to get ready for a date. While I was in the shower, I suddenly heard loud banging on my door, so loud I could hear it from the bathroom. I quickly turned off the shower, put on my robe, and assumed it was my boyfriend. But when I checked the peephole, I saw the same man, in the same hoodie and cap, standing there. Fear gripped me, so I stayed as quiet as I could and started calling my boyfriend over and over, hoping he'd arrive quickly, as he lives nearby. Unfortunately, his phone was on silent from work. The man waited in the hallway, texting again, and finally left after about 10 minutes. My boyfriend thought I was maybe being a bit too cautious, but I don't know this person or why he keeps showing up at my door in a supposedly secure building. When I spoke with management to see if they knew who he was or if anyone had been sent to my apartment, they said no. They promised to have the door lock fixed by today, but that's all. I feel disheartened that what should be my safe space no longer feels secure. Maybe I am overreacting, but it certainly doesn't feel that way to me.